Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD and a 9/11 first responder. You know, when we started covering this case, which has become known, of course, in the media to shorten it up as the Kansas City Three, we also realized that they have names Clayton McGeeney, Ricky Johnson, and David Harrington. But the case has become more now. It's almost a cause celeb for the media changing the sort of narrative of what went on here. And one of the questions that I want to answer during this show is three adults, the gentlemen whose names I had just read, go to a football watch party, right? Where there is, of course, alcohol, food, and unfortunately, drugs. Now, the big question is, did they ingest these drugs voluntarily? And I believe the answer to that is yes. And of course, no one, including Clayton McGeeney, Ricky Johnson, or David Harrington, expected to lose their lives over this football watch party, which occurred on the 7th of January, and their bodies weren't recovered until the 9th. So many questions because of this, we're all asking. We all want to know the answers to it. And until very recently, we didn't have a lot of the answers. And people are making up scenarios, what ifs, woulda, coulda, shouldas, and what ifs. And in fact, someone said in the chat, and I believe I answered it before the show, the person who supplied the drugs, could that person be held liable? Could that person be arrested? And the answer to that is yes. If the police can find out who supplied those drugs, and we mentioned it previously on our other shows, if you give someone a drug, that is considered, at least in New York State, to be a sale. Just the mere offer of giving it to them can be drug sales. So if they wind up dead from the drugs that you gave them, yes, you can be held liable. You can be charged with felony murder. So with that in mind, that's what the subject of the show is going to be today. Did these four adults, was it criminal, or was it the result of three grown men's bad decisions? And in no way am I unsympathetic to their families. I'm 100% sympathetic to their families, to the loved ones. But when we look at something from a perspective of analyzing it, we must answer that question. These three adults, and there's the fourth on the screen, Jordan Willis, who wound up in his house, which of course people always point out, he didn't own that house, he rented it. Yes, I know that. But he had control and authority over that house. He now has checked himself into rehab. He, at the very beginning of this investigation, when interviewed by the police, cooperated. In fact, he allowed the police to do what's known as a consent search of his house. So we're going to cover a lot of these issues today, and I'm going to introduce my co-host today after we play the Police Off the Cuff theme song. So folks, hold on to your seats. Get ready for a really interesting Sunday afternoon. You're about to enter true crime from a police perspective. And of course, off the cuff, as we always do. You're entering the off the cuff, the police off the cuff zone. There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped in 10th and Ranch Michael by there.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
So while we're at it, let me get right to it and invite or introduce my co-host today. You guys know him very well. He's a retired NYPD sergeant, a professor at Albertus Magnus College in Connecticut, and also just happened along the way to pick up a law degree. Welcome to the show, Professor and Sergeant Michael Geary.
Hey, Bill. Thank you for having me on. Good afternoon from sunny New York, where we've seen the sun now for the first time in weeks.
Wow.
How are you?
You know, Mike, I'm so glad, I a lot of times if people know the way I work, I just sometimes decide to do a show hours or minutes before I do it. And thank God you have no life, because I can just call you and you're like, I'm ready.
All
I'm
right.
just sitting around reading textbooks, and
Grading
you're
papers.
available. And that's great. That's great because I don't have to go it solo. Anyway, Mike, the big, of course, question we have today, and you saw it on the thumbnail here. The Kansas City Three, and of course, I don't like to use that term, but because of the thumbnail, I have to do that. Clayton McGeeney, Ricky Johnson, David Harrington, ages 36, 38, and 37. The bottom line is they are all three adults, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, the decision to ingest drugs is up to the individual. And they made that decision. No one believes that they were forced to do cocaine, smoke marijuana, and no one knows if, in fact, they knew, or most likely they didn't know, that any one of those two or four mentioned drugs contained fentanyl. Your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, Bill, it seems this was very consensual. This is probably a number of times where the group have gotten together. They're all friends. They've been friends for many years. They get together, and this is maybe something they do. Whenever Kansas City is having a home game, they get a watch party going, some beers, some hot food, and somebody might bring a little Coke, a little blow or something, a little marijuana. Now, the only question I have is whether or not they knew, whether or not they ingested the Coke through snorting it, licking it, whatever they did, or was it mixed in with food, and they did not know that they were actually ingesting some sort of narcotic. It seems like a far-fetched thing that somebody would plant illicit drugs, mix it in with the food. I don't know. It's the only thing I could think of that might be a weird monkey wrench into the scenario. But it looks right off the bat that this was a total voluntary, knowingly doing something without being coerced into doing these actions.
I see in the chat someone just wrote one of these three men has three children. You know something?
Yeah.
I feel for these men.
Yeah.
None of them intended to go to a good time football watch party, and no one intended to die. And sometimes when you make poor decisions, and we've all made poor decisions throughout our life, sometimes there are unforgiving consequences. And in this cases, the cases of these three men, the consequences were unforgiving. I want to address some of the other things. Now, what everyone, of course, is making a big issue of, and, rightfully so, is how and why did the police say right away that there is no foul play in this? Look, whenever you find 3 dead bodies in someone's yard, that's an unusual occurrence, right? That's not something that happens every day. And when the 3 individuals are solid citizens that work jobs, have families, you really question it. So the fact that maybe the police used that language, that there was no foul play and no signs of criminality, it seems like that upset a lot of people, specifically the families of these 3 individuals, and also the news media jumped all over this, that how are the police saying this? And why didn't the police do that? And why did, the woulda, shoulda, couldas. That's what we always say. And as far as I know, there's no one in the media that's addressed this case that is prior law enforcement. They bring on a lot of law enforcement talking heads to get to the bottom of this and see if police procedure was followed. But as we always say in law enforcement, you can't judge another man unless you were there. You really have to be on the scene. You can judge anyone, actually, but to give a good assessment and an accurate assessment, You really have to be on the scenes and see what made them make certain decisions, what made them say certain things. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, you, Phil, and I understood when we saw that there was no signs of foul play. We understood what they meant because we've been there in law enforcement for over 20 years. So we understood what they were saying. However, the families have absolutely every right to sit there and say, "What do you mean? How could you say that? There are three men who passed away. They're dead in the backyard of this other gentleman's house, Willis's house, after a party. Three people just don't spontaneously die. There's got to be some criminality." And I think it would have been much better if the police had said, we see no outward signs of foul play because we don't find any sort of trauma to the body. However, we will continue to investigate to see if there was any see what the obvious non-obvious causes of death may have been. Something along that line I think would have been a little bit better. Only the police, and doctors and nurses and firefighters and paramedics would understand really the jargon that the police department used, and that upset the family. It was unnecessarily upsetting. They shouldn't have done that. They should have been a little bit more explicit in what they actually meant by that term. Absolutely, the families have every right to feel like, what the heck are you talking about? Yeah.
Absolutely. Natasha Ski, I want to answer this. It's a very good question, and I think it opens up a lot of other questions. Jordan never called the police. The police were finally called when the girlfriend broke in. Natasha Ski, because he was in a drug-induced stupor.
Right.
Just as bad as the other three. However, he was in the house. And we've had several medical doctors say that even though drugs were a contributing factor, potentially they died from cardiac arrest because they passed out and they froze to death. In fact, the bodies were frozen solid when the police responded on the 9th and recovered them. They couldn't do the autopsies for several days because of that. I've seen that before, and it's a reality. They can't do the autopsies till the bodies actually thaw out. And Budster, what a tragedy, so sad for the families. We're not immune. We're human beings too, besides being former police, and we feel for the families. In fact, I want to play a little bit of News Nation with Cuomo that interviewed some of the families in this case. I was going to play it. All of a sudden, it's frozen up.
In their friend's backyard. We now understand from
This is terrible.
the reporting that there was cocaine and fentanyl in their system. Okay, fentanyl, probably the deadliest drug in our midst.
So cocaine and fentanyl. And you could see on the screen the pictures of David Harrington.
All right. It's been 24 hours since that reporting came out.
I'm going to take this off the screen right now. We're having some problems with it freezing up. So the big story, of course, when the toxicology report came back was, of course, if the press didn't push, the police would have never released it. Well, the district attorney called the families in and had a meeting with the families. And they told the families, this is where we are at right now with the investigation. This is where it's going. And they discussed the toxicology report. And yes, we regularly report on almost every case where toxicology is a question. We report that it usually takes 6 to 8 weeks. And if you noticed, they didn't say that this is the complete toxicology report. They said this is a preliminary toxicology report. And they were careful to say that. And of course, the press jumped all over it. If we didn't push, they would have never released it. Well, you know something? Is it really going to make that much difference in the case, or is it just going to make the difference in your reporting of the case? Because, the important thing is the difference it makes in the case. And that we'll find that out down the road. But right now, you reporting of it is not what should be one of the decision-making factors for the district attorney or the police as to whether they release the toxicology report. And in fact, they didn't release the toxicology report to the press. They released it to the families because they wanted the families to see what they had. So when the press gets crazy with this, oh, we were the ones that forced them to relate. No, well, take it easy. Take it easy. News Nation and some of you other stations, as I said, it's not going to make a hill of beans difference in the investigation. It will make a difference in your reporting of the investigation. Mike.
Yeah, Billy, it was just the press, and we're part of the press and things like that. It just goes to clickbait, and it goes to feeling good, like they've accomplished something real in an investigation, like they matter. The fact is, they don't matter. Or maybe in rare circumstances, do they matter? What matters is the accuracy of the toxicology report, the competency of the investigators, the competency of the medical examiner's office. We've discussed this in the Koberger case. We discussed this in the Human case. These things take a long time. 6 weeks, 8 weeks to get all that information. The cell phone information, the download. I am sure the investigators aren't saying, well, okay, we got the toxicology report. Okay, case closed. No, they have to look at all the cell phone information to see who was texting who. Was there any awareness of the combination of the narcotics, what the harm could it do, what they were actually ingesting? We have to know all these things. The investigators have to know all these things as best they can. And that's going to happen whether or not the press ever wakes up and puts out some sort of product on the internet. It's going to happen with or without them. It's mostly they're worried about clickbaits and ratings, and that's about it. And that's a disservice to the community. It's a disservice to the public. And it could also be a disservice to the families because they want to break a story. But the families are the ones who should be getting some of this information first. And in this case, they got it first, and that's excellent. And it was released from them to the press, not because they're like a Woodward and Bernstein, tracking down conspiracies. No, it's their ability to, bring out information. That's great. And that's fantastic. But they are not the people who actually make the investigation happen. No way, no how.
Absolutely. Someone had a good point. I know I just had it for a second. Let me find it. Just lost it in the chat. It moved away from me.
Okay.
Some of you guys have some really good. Here it is. Cheesy 63 Mary from Canada. This is from the chat. It's not surprising Jordan was passed out for 2 days, not answering calls, etc. Cheesy 63 Mary, I
You're
100% agree with you.
Right.
People are baffled by that. Why didn't he answer this? Why didn't he do that? What? Because he was in a drug-induced stupor, except he didn't die. He took the same amount, probably. And again, fentanyl acts differently on different people. 4 different people can take the same amount. 3 can die and 1 can live. In this instance, probably Jordan lived because he was inside and not subject to the freezing cold temperatures. Mike.
Yeah, Billy, that's right. We've seen this many times in paramedics, nurses, firemen, doctors, where you get someone who's taken some sort of large amount of narcotics and they will pass out for days and days and days. That is not uncommon. I've seen people awake for almost a week straight because they're smoking crack and they're just walking around like zombies. So the human body is amazing the stress it can endure, but the 2-day sleep, that is not that uncommon. It sounds weird to people who aren't, working with in some sort of medical sort of field. It's not uncommon at all. So yeah, thank you very much for that actual insight. That's fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. That's very common.
Absolutely. Let me see if this will play now. I don't know. Cuomo's not wanting to play today. So
still,
those are the 4
why were they outside when they were taking it? What about the friend who survived?
What about the friend who survived? He's referring to Jordan, of course. Again, I'm thinking this is not going to play today. I don't know what the situation is. My Wi-Fi, guys, I'm in Florida, and I've had a problem with it loading, and I upped it to 1,000 gigabytes, which costs money, and I did that. It's still having the problem, and I've had them here 3 times. So it's not for lack of trying. But anyway, so Cuomo was talking about, News Nation. I don't know how to describe it. They're on top of these cases, but sometimes news stations push a certain narrative that may not be the correct narrative, the true narrative, and we can be accused of it too, and people could call it on YouTube as clickbait. Oh, you're saying this because more people will agree with you. But what I'm just saying is that this case is a case of adults with, there's an old expression, you're a master of your own destiny. You make decisions in your life that will have an effect on your destiny. And in this case, of course, 4 adults, 3 of them died from a poor decision. One of them, his life will be altered forever. One of them now goes to drug rehab. Did he go to drug rehab? And I want to ask this of the chat. Did he go to drug rehab because he has a drug problem? Or did he go to drug rehab to avoid the police and the prosecutor of asking, and his attorney? Did he go to hide from that? If you think he went to rehab because he has a real drug problem, put a 1 in the chat. I'd just be interested. And if you think he went to rehab to avoid the spotlight on him and the possibility that he would have to accompany his attorney and with his attorney, because they can't question him without his attorney can also say, no, he's not going to be questioned, period. But he obviously is a target of whether or not did he supply these drugs that left these 3 men frozen to death in his yard. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, we've all done stupid and foolish things in our lives as children and as adults. And some of them might involve alcohol and narcotics and perhaps driving while intoxicated, all those sorts of things. They're not that uncommon. And so these gentlemen may have used marijuana and at the parties, or maybe did a line of coke at a party, and they may have done it a number of times and they've gotten away with it. Or maybe this was actually the very first time this had ever happened, bringing narcotics to a party. We don't know. And unfortunately, this happened to catch up to them, and they are passed away. But I think that Willis going to rehab actually is probably the best thing for him overall, no matter what happens, because obviously he needs to straighten out his life, because what has gone on in a home that he was renting, these sort of things happen. And I'm sure he is feeling tremendous guilt. I'm not even going to go into whether or not he's liable, because the police probably know right now who actually brought the narcotics into the home. But I can't imagine what it would be like to be him and having to live with the fact that maybe some of your best friends are dead because of a party that you threw and that you allowed to go on with narcotics, and they passed away. My heart goes out to him too, because he's between a rock and a hard place, no matter how this turns out.
Absolutely. Paul K., thank you for the $5 super sticker. Great show. Did Jordan have a dry run? Hence the dogs given to dad because he knew he would pass out. Unknown. I don't know that. I mean, look, people that go into a drug stupor, they're not thinking straight. They're not themselves. And just remember, not that it matters in this situation, but Jordan has a PhD. He's a smart guy. Look, smart people do stupid things too, right? So he's a smart guy. These guys were all friends since high school. So when we talk about, who's responsible for this, that's why my whole dissertation on this is, 4 adults are together. They all make a decision to do drugs. Bad decision, right? 3 of them wind up dead. 1 has his life altered now for the rest of his life, Jordan Willis. I'm sure any of the other 3 would have rather have had their lives altered than be dead. But he has this guilt, and maybe he did not supply the drugs, but everyone's pointing fingers at him like he's the responsible party for him. But again, all of these folks are adults, and they all made a very, very poor decision in doing drugs. This was the Dr. Bod toxicology report, if we could get this to play. But
Bill, do you mind if I
Chiefs
interject real quick?
fans found frozen to death last month, the beginning of January, after that watch party.
So this is what we know. These are only preliminary results, but sources with direct knowledge of the case tell
yeah,
Bill, I just want to make a quick observation.
Go
Remember
ahead.
the fifth
TMZ that
gentleman.
other substances.
Go ahead.
Remember the fifth gentleman left, and he said he left around midnight. So my guess, from what I can see, what I know, is that the narcotic ingestion was probably done after midnight, because that gentleman himself probably did not indulge at all. He left, and maybe perhaps in the timeline, it was really late, like well after midnight, in the early morning hours of the next day, that the ingestion took place, and most likely the deaths happened very quickly after that. I just want to make that point.
No, well, Dr. Bodden said that hypothermia could happen as quickly as 1 hour. So we got to keep that in mind.
May surface once the official results come out. We know that the family members of those fans who died have a copy of the report, but they have not confirmed what it says.
All right, this comes after we learned that Jordan Willis, the host of the party, checked himself into rehab. He is not currently facing any charges, and police insist the deaths are not being investigated as homicides. But should they be? Let's bring in Dr. Michael Bodden. He's right here, pathologist, Fox News contributor. Dr. Bodden, this revelation, we thought about drugs,
Right.
Reasonable people thought it was drugs. What does this tell you? Cocaine and fentanyl.
As Lauren said, we have to wait for the
actual
official report to come out, but it appears at this time that there was
fentanyl, obviously, in what they ingested, whether it was the cocaine or if they put fentanyl
and
in
other drugs present.
the joint.
Fentanyl is used by doctors because it's a powerful painkiller, and one of the side effects is making a person sleepy. And what happened here, I think, could have been that the four of them used the drugs together. The one fellow who comes in and sleeps on the couch indoors sleeps it off
2 days
for a while.
Sleeps it off for 2 days. But you could see even Dr. Bodden doesn't think that that's unusual.
No.
So sleeping it off.
Whereas the other three get sleepy and pass out outside, and
they wind up losing their lives because they froze to death. That's basically what Dr. Bodden was getting to. Now, many people are making a huge issue of the fact that Jordan slept for 2 days, and as we said, that's not unusual for someone. And of course, people were trying to call him. People were trying to text message him. In fact, the fiance of one of the victims, one of the gentlemen who lost his life, she broke into the house. And then she discovered the bodies in the backyard and called the police. So these things are not. Oh, and I want to address something that someone said in the chat. And I don't recall whether it was today or previous chat. Someone said, well, I think that some of the bodies were killed elsewhere and dragged there. All right, we got that covered. Science has that covered. All right. There's something called lividity. All right. And when a body is laying on its back, for example, and then moved to another location, you could tell that the original position of the body was laying on its back because of something called lividity. And that's that blood pools to the dependent location where gravity pushes it. And if you ever saw a dead body that has lividity, it almost looks like a sunburn, that the blood pooled to that side. So if the bodies were moved, we would see the lividity in the original location. So that, I think, sort of disqualifies that theory. Mike?
Yeah, Billy, you're right. We've all seen this when people have been dead for a while, just 2 2 hours or something like that. As the heart stops, gravity takes over, the body cools, all the blood flows to the lowest portion. So they would be able to tell, and also there would be drag marks in the backyard, probably that sort of thing. And to drag, three gentlemen, if there was, you would need one, two, or three people. You would have to drag them from the house outside. Now we're talking about like a real conspiracy to commit murder, where it's almost like a drug hit. Yeah, it's a thought, it's a theory, and maybe you could think about it for like 30 seconds. But as a police officer, I'd be like, no, that would be patently obvious, pretty darn quick in the investigation, and discarded pretty darn soon. So that's about a 1 in a million chance that actually happened.
Yeah, I just like to address,
Yeah.
the chat and some of the theories that people bring forward, and I'm not taking away anyone's right or to have an educated guess, which is a hypothesis or a theory. That's fine, but the science can defeat some of these theories right away, folks. This is Police Off the Cuff, real crime stories. If you like real crime or true crime from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, ring that bell, like us, share us with your family, your friends. If you haven't watched, we just hit 60,000 subscribers, and it's sort of been a long time coming. I've been doing this for almost 4 years, and we've had a lot of different hills and valleys on this podcast, a lot of different directions. And right now, we're really happy about the direction we're going, and we appreciate all your support that is making this show what it is. We also have a Patreon if you want to support us financially with 3 different levels. And we have a YouTube channel membership with, count 'em, 5 different levels. And you can join us on YouTube again if you want to subscribe to us. So, Mike, one of the things, again, and the theme of this show, of course, is personal responsibility as to what occurred here. And we hear a lot of the news stations, of course, talking about criminal liability and then civil liability and all of this stuff. And what we're saying on Police Off the Cuff is personal responsibility. And the fact that adults in this case made a decision that turned out to be a really, really horrific decision that cost them their lives. And when we talk about this drug, and we're glad we can put it out there also, fentanyl, which is a deadly, deadly drug. And sometimes people will come in contact with it accidentally and lose their lives. And we have that antidote called Narcan, which many police officers' lives have been saved because Narcan is on the scene to save their life when they come in contact with that. And we spoke the other day about when we were on the job, a drug that was not even in the same league as fentanyl, but it was a problem for us, and that was angel dust. Do you remember that, Mike?
Oh yeah, all the protocols surrounding that. If you're exposed to it, you got to go to the hospital. You got to get a control number. Oh yeah, you get it on your skin. It could be absorbed. If you inhale it a little bit, it can get into your bloodstream. Oh yeah, it was a whole rigmarole over angel dust. Oh yeah.
Absolutely. Chris B., thank you so much for the $9.99 super sticker. Sergeant Bill and Professor Mike, appreciate your expertise. Always learn so much from both of you. Congrats on reaching 60,000. Thank you so much. It's been an uphill climb, as they say, but now we can stand at the top of the hill and look a little bit. Take a few minutes of what do they say? Admiring your work a little bit. I don't know. I don't know if that's the proper word. From the chat, Natashski, I think if you look at the totality of all the details, it's really difficult to not assume something sinister happened here. To not assume. Well, you can think that, but no one's tossing this investigation out. No one's saying that's the end of it. This is the decision. This is what we found. The investigation's over with. No one's doing that. If they were doing that, then I would agree with you, but they're not doing that. They're saying, look, there's 5 ways a death investigation, and it's called manner of death, not cause, manner of death. And Manner of death is either homicide, suicide, accidental, natural, or undetermined. Wow, I can remember all those 5 things. I'm getting old. I don't know if I could remember it. So homicide, suicide, accidental, natural, or undetermined. Right now, this is a death investigation, derivation undetermined, except now they know it looks like it was a drug overdose. And potentially the autopsy could tell us, yes, drugs were involved, but cardiac arrest due to exposure to the elements was the cause. So that would be a manner of death, right? It's not natural. Potentially, could they say this was an accidental death, Mike?
Billy, they could. I think Natasha is what she's thinking is perhaps somewhere along the line that excuse me, somebody actually may have laced the cocaine intentionally, perhaps with fentanyl, knowingly cut it with fentanyl, and sold it to one of the gentlemen, and figuring they would ingest it. That would be possible murder. Right now, this investigation, depending on where it goes, right now it seems that it's a it's a death investigation. It may turn into a homicide investigation. It could possibly do that, but it probably doesn't seem that way right now. But I understand what you're saying, and if that was actually true, yeah, this would then turn into a homicide investigation. But probably not. And one of the things that you see, everybody understands the danger of fentanyl, and everybody does understand that cocaine can kill you too. We've seen athletes die of cocaine overdose, and so therefore, even if there was, and I'm sure the gentleman did not have any idea that there was fentanyl in the cocaine, but just ingesting the cocaine itself is a very risky thing to do, especially when you're drinking alcohol and you got the combination acting on your body. That was highly risky behavior that they voluntarily engaged in. And unfortunately, it caught up to them. And so right now, it looks like an accidental ingestion, unintended accidental ingestion of narcotics. But I understand the point you're making. It's possible. We'll have to see. You don't know. This investigation is far from being complete at this point.
Mike, you raised a good point there. Alcohol is a depressant.
Mm-hmm.
Cocaine is like a speed.
Yeah.
So you put those things together and you can also die of cardiac arrest. And so, and then, of course, add fentanyl to this and you just everything. This is Dan Abrams. Is it Dan
Finally,
Abrams?
some updates in the case of the 3 men found dead outside of a friend's home in Kansas City 3 weeks ago after watching a Chiefs game. The police now have the toxicology reports, and they apparently show fentanyl, cocaine, marijuana in the systems of all 3 men. News Nation is told the amount of fentanyl is well beyond the lethal limit, not legal, but lethal, 3 times the amount. The toxicology reports were shared with family members of the 3 men, 38-year-old Ricky Johnson, 36-year-old Clayton McGinney, and 37-year-old David Harrington. After mounting pressure from family and the media, the family's furious over the lack of answers until this point. Meanwhile, the living friend, Jordan
Willis, he's talking about,
Right.
the living man who went into rehab. And we asked before, did he go into rehab because
Willis
we'll
moved
add this
out of the
back.
house, checked himself into rehab. Willis never contacted.
All right, I'll remove this again. So Willis removed himself, went into rehab, and we asked the question earlier on in the show, did Jordan Willis enter rehab because he's legitimately got a drug problem, or did he enter rehab because he was trying to avoid the prying eyes of investigators, the police, the district attorney's office, and of course, the press, who is all over this case? Mike.
Yeah, Billy, he may have done it for several motives, but he obviously has a narcotic problem because at the time that they're ingesting alcohol, they're also ingesting marijuana and cocaine that unfortunately did have the mixture with fentanyl. So if I'm his attorney, I'm telling him, you got to get yourself straightened out and you got to do this now. And it'll give you an opportunity to get out of the limelight. There won't be anybody knocking on your door. No, no news reporters, nothing like that. Nobody's gonna, you don't answer your phone. You're going to be away. You got to work on that. I'll handle, communications for you and your family. But other than that, I think it's a smart move, both for himself personally and for him legally. And if I was his attorney, I'd tell him to do exactly that: remove himself and then protect himself.
Absolutely. Michelina Kimmel from the chat. I can't understand why anyone thinks something nefarious happened. Is it just weeks for the views or cloud or questions? They obviously were partying and their coke was laced. It happens every day, everywhere.
It's true.
Michelina, that's a great point. The other thing is that I don't know anyone in this country that doesn't have a friend or a family member who's been affected by drugs or narcotics. And you could even throw alcohol in there too, because we have members of, I had members of my family that were addicted to drugs, and we all understand it. But yet, there was that famous expression years ago where people said, oh, it's so ridiculous, where Nancy Reagan used to say, just say no, as if it was that simple, to avoid drug addiction. Just say no. And that became sort of the rallying cry. But as we all know, it's not that simple to just say no. All right. That's why there's drug rehabs. That's why there's people in jails and prisons and rehabs going for counseling, because alcohol and drug abuse is a real thing. And now these three gentlemen that went to this football watch party, Clayton McGeeney, Ricky Johnson, and David Harrington, they were functional. They weren't drug addicts. They went to a football party like millions of Americans do every day of the football season. And we drink beer, we eat wings, we eat meatball heroes, we eat, all kinds of bad things for us that, is comfort food. And then in this instance, besides drinking beers, they decided to do some drugs, And as we spoke about, they were adults. They made a bad decision. And then this whole investigation just blows up and becomes something other than, the conspiracies come out of the woodwork, What they killed? Where's this guy? Jordan. He's a chemist. He made the drugs without any evidence whatsoever. People come out of the woodwork and start pointing fingers and making allegations against a man who can't defend himself right now. And his only guilt is that he's the one who survived. He's the one who's alive. Mike.
Yeah, Bill, we've, like I said before, we've all done some idiotic things in our life that we wish we had not done, and maybe put our lives in danger and the lives of others in danger. I think these gentlemen had maybe partied sometimes before, maybe in the same manner, and they were desensitized because they were healthy and young and nothing had ever happened previously. They were a little desensitized to the actual risks that they were taking, because nothing had actually ever bad happened before to them. So therefore they're doing this. Narcotic and alcohol abuse is endemic in our population. It is a crisis. And unfortunately, even with all of the knowledge we have and all of the media that we have, with the statistics and many people overdosing and being killed by fentanyl and alcohol and cocaine, we continue as a body of humans to do it. And we do it at our own risk, and we do it knowingly at our own risk, because we are desensitized. Until you actually have a member of your family who is actually, gone to prison or had to go to rehab or has passed away from one of these three things, the alcohol, the coke, or the fentanyl, you don't really understand and appreciate the true magnitude of the dangers involved. And if any good could ever possibly come from their deaths, it would be that people would stop doing the coke, and then therefore there would be a lot less exposure, perhaps, to fentanyl in this country.
I want to ask the chat another question. I want to ask you guys, and again, part one responds with the one in the chat, part two respond with the two. Who thinks that the deaths of these three folks, known as the Kansas City Three, Clayton McGinney, Ricky Johnson, and David Harrington is a homicide. You think it's criminal in nature. Or that would be number one. Or number two, who thinks it's an accidental drug overdose? Number two. I'd just be interested in seeing, because I think most people are in the camp of, and not that it matters, you can think whatever you want to think, are in the camp of the number two. So if you think it's a homicide, it's criminal in nature, that someone forced these people or and you know something, it's a very slippery slope, because technically whoever gave them these drugs can be charged with felony murder. However, did anyone force these individuals to take these drugs? But that's neither here nor there. So the person that gave them these drugs, and if they can prove that is Jordan, he very well could be charged with murder. However, was any of these adults, and I use that term, adults, forced to take these drugs? So again, number one, if you think it's a homicide. Number two, if you think it was an accidental drug overdose. I'd just be interested in seeing that from the chat. And Mike, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, because Jordan Willis, it was his home, and we're assuming he's the one that supplied the narcotics, and also maybe because of his background, his PhD is in chemistry. And so some people think he's like a Walter White, or maybe not less nefarious, but just a very careless host, and who introduced cocaine into a party, and therefore ended up killing three of his friends. You could look at it that way, but we don't know that right now. It's possible the fifth person who had left introduced the narcotics and left before he even used them. I doubt that. Or one of the three gentlemen, Harrington, Johnson, McGinney, one of them may have introduced it. We don't know. I think the police probably know by now. But going back from did they cut it themselves, or did somebody else cut it for them and sell it to them, which is what I think happened. The person who maybe cut the narcotic and maybe threw in some, baby powder and talcum powder, all kinds of stuff that you and I have seen on the street with people taken with cocaine, because it's probably cut down to about less than 10% purity. That person would be criminally liable for murder, or at the very least, it would be manslaughter, but maybe even intentional homicide, which is a murder. It's possible. Yes, it is possible. And I'm hoping Kansas City Police Department Narcotics Division is in on the investigation, and maybe we'll have our answers. And maybe the answers in a couple of weeks may be very different from what we're assuming right now. It may turn into a murder investigation, a homicide investigation. We're not sure. It may go there, but as of right now, it doesn't seem to be that. But it could also be that they're already doing that, and they just are being very tight-lipped. We don't know, but it could possibly be a criminal homicide arrest at the end of the investigation.
Absolutely. Sharon Parker, I didn't give the choice of number three. I don't know what you mean by number three. Number one was homicide. Number two was accidental overdose. Tell me what you mean by number three. I don't mean to embarrass you. I just didn't give that as a choice. Most folks in the chat picked number two. So most of you guys believe that this was an accidental drug overdose, as I believe.
Yeah.
However, one of the things we mentioned again on our other shows, and when you're an investigator, a homicide investigator, if you go into someone's yard and there's 3 dead bodies in that yard, I'm thinking murder. I'm thinking homicide, and you must treat it as a homicide. What does that mean? How do you treat it as a homicide? Well, you treat it as a homicide by giving great care in protecting the crime scene, giving great care in processing the crime scene, giving great care in photographing the crime scene, giving great care in the investigation, canvassing the area, the surrounding neighborhood. In this case, they did do a canvass because they found some neighbors, in fact, that had videotaped Jordan being handcuffed when they pulled him out of the house. Do you remember that? Mm-hmm. He was handcuffed and unhandcuffed, and he was brought to the station house where he was interviewed. He cooperated. He agreed to a consent search. Did they find anything in the consent search? That we're not privy to. In fact, after the consent search, they did get a search warrant to search the rest of the house. So it was being handled as a homicide. But that the danger of this is when, of course, we get a lot of the people from the press criticizing the police investigation when they don't fully know what the police have done, what the scope of, and we saw this and we see this because we cover cases all over this country, all over this world. We saw this in Idaho. Brian Koberger, who's arrested for the murder of the 4 Idaho students, right? And the police were criticized up and down and in and out, and they were criticized on the amount of time it took to make an arrest. You know how long it took to make an arrest in the Idaho case? Do you know, Mike?
Yeah, 6 weeks.
6 weeks.
Yeah.
Is that too long for you, press? You don't like that it took 6 weeks? Is that they were shouting for the FBI should take this over? This is ridiculous. Is this a cold case? They actually said that.
Right.
Well, some of the things they said made me cringe at the ignorance of it. You know,
The FBI didn't have jurisdiction in the case.
of course not, and not just that. The FBI was assisting.
Right.
They had all of the FBI's resources,
Mhm.
toys, investigators. They had all of that stuff, but yet people in the press were saying, "Should the FBI?" Why are you saying that? That's not a possibility. Who would make that decision? The president of the United States? No, there is no time when the FBI would do that. But the press is throwing, and like they're throwing stuff out in this case, right? They didn't even take a bottle of pills that was found. I was like, oh my God, where did they get that from?
Right.
Quadruple hearsay, and they're putting that out there as the truth, Mike.
Yeah, Billy, as you know and I know, if being on patrol and you and Phil, the detectives, if I'm the sergeant on the scene and there's, my patrolman got, to the scene and there's 3 dead bodies and a guy sleeping on the inside of the house, that has to be treated as a homicide crime scene. So I'm going to, before you guys even get there as a detective supervisor and a detective, I'm going to make sure that place is roped off. Nobody's coming onto that property. Nobody's coming in that backyard. Any paramedics coming in, they want to take a look at the body and say, yeah, that's dead, and declare the body's dead. They're going to be very careful. Everything is going to be handled as if it was a homicide scene. And you want to be extra careful, and not cavaliering in how you handle these things, because you never get a second chance if you mess up the crime scene. What they did was really great. From what I could see, by talking to Willis, getting a consent search, and then going back and getting a search warrant from a judge, which then therefore expands the ability of you to search places where maybe Willis wouldn't give you permission to search. So therefore you've got that. They're doing a good job, and the criticism of the police, like in the Idaho case, is unwarranted because it comes out of not knowing police procedure or having press conferences. So unfortunately, the lack of available information leads to a vacuum, an information vacuum, and is filled by people with all kinds of conspiracy theories, and and they're incompetent, and the FBI should just take over. No. Give the police some credit.
Exactly. From the chat, Greg McNeely, 1 + 2 = 3. Homicide committed by the dealer and accidental OD. Over 50% of fentanyl ODs don't know that they are ingesting fentanyl. Greg McNeely, great point.
Yes.
I 100% agree with you.
Absolutely.
But the point here is that we question is, will they be able to find the supplier of these drugs that were ingested? Will they try to stick it on Jordan Willis because he was the person of record, rented the home that the party was in? I don't know if they'll ever find out who supplied the drugs. Could have one of the 3 that passed have supplied the drugs? That's a possibility too. So the families, of course, are livid over what they consider to be an investigation not up to par. But, we shall see. Banfield here will try to get her. Again, here we go. I got
At the
it.
same time, I didn't expect to hear from the victim's stepmom last night and hear that there were pill bottles inside a backpack that the police did not even bother to take. What are you hearing on the scene at this point?
Look, I can tell you that this was unexpected, not just for us, but also for the family members. Think about this. I've been knocking on doors, including the medical examiner's office, asking them, look, are you guys going to expedite this toxicology report? And basically, they told me point blank, no, this case is no different than anyone else that comes across our desk, but something must have happened. Something must have changed.
Now, did the press really expedite
Maybe it was
this?
that meeting with the Platte County prosecutor, because now all of a sudden we are seeing an expedition of this case. All of a sudden, preliminary toxicology reports are coming into the families, and they now know at least a portion of the story, which is inside of the bloodstream of those three men was fentanyl, cocaine, and THC. We don't know the actual specifics, the levels that might have been in that bloodstream.
So, again, they came out with this. They gave the initial reports, of course, to the families. This wasn't really meant for the press. The families leaked it to the
Certainly,
press.
it was enough to go beyond, well beyond the lethal dose.
All right, we'll move that out there. So you could see that they obviously were quite upset. I mean, when you see Banfield saying, where did that come from? That there was a bottle of pills. That's like, that's not a sworn. That's not evidence. You're just repeating something that someone told you. Quadruple hearsay. Hang on one second, Mike. Infamous truth teller. I feel Jordan possibly had a higher tolerance and was teetering on OD, so he slept so long and was lucky to have woke up. Thank you so much, infamous truth teller, for the $5 super sticker. I absolutely agree with you, and I don't, in a way, understand how people can not understand that that's possible. Sure. And of course, people are angry. 3 young men lost their lives. People are angry and they want someone to pay for this. However, as is the theme of this whole show, there may not be anyone to pay for this other than the 3 individuals that lost their lives, that made an adult decision to use drugs, and I hate to be that blunt, and I'm not unfeeling. I feel for the families. I feel for these 3 men that lost their lives, but they made a bad adult decision, Mike.
Yeah, Billy, it appears that way. And, Willis threw the party. They probably had many parties in the past. They've been friends for many years. And at this point, I can't see, I don't see that Willis, intentionally would lace cocaine with fentanyl to kill these people, or that he knew that the cocaine was laced with fentanyl. From his actions, he was asleep for 2 days. When the police came, he gave a consent search. Now, Donna Douglas in the chat asked about the difference between a consent search and a search pursuant to a search warrant. And I just want to address that really quick. Willis gave a consent to search. I don't know if he gave consent to search the whole entire house or maybe just the kitchen. But when you do consent to a search, you could limit that consent. But then the police went back and they got a search warrant from a judge, which would allow them to do a much greater search. So if Willis had actually tried to limit the police ability to search the home, the police can then circumvent that by going to a judge and getting a more expansive search warrant. But in court, they're both considered the same. If they're both reasonable under the Fourth Amendment, then whatever found in the consent search would be admissible as evidence against somebody, and whatever was found pursuant to a search warrant would be admissible in court to either convict someone or exonerate someone. So it was a great question by Donna Douglas. Thank you very much. I love those kind of questions. But,
Mike, as a homicide sergeant, as one who's been to hundreds of homicide scenes, thousands of crime scenes, I wouldn't be comfortable with a consent search on a case this serious.
Mm-hmm.
And I would wait. I would absolutely wait. Have the crime scene, or what we consider to be the crime scene, in this case, the home, secured so no one can go in and out. And I would await the the search warrant, because down the road, a clever defense attorney can get the consent search thrown out, being that, hey, number one, my client was in a drug-induced stupor. How could he
knowingly and willingly done?
exactly? How could he give permission?
Right.
I challenged that. He had X amount of drugs in his system.
Good
I
point.
challenged the consent search. So I would not have been comfortable in this incidence with a consent search, and I would have waited. And a lot of times, like the police, and it's not being lazy. It's, you know, if you can cut to the chase, you can also call the district attorney, go say, listen, he's willing to sign a consent search. Can we go with that? And the district attorney may say, what's his condition? Well, he seems a little, no, let's go with the search warrant. And I think that would have been the way to go in this situation. So I don't know if they found anything on the consent search.
Right.
They did go back the next day with a search warrant. What was recovered then? So if they did recover drugs in the search warrant, how do we determine whose drugs they were? What if they were inside of Jordan's? People are talking about backpacks here, something belonging to Jordan. Does that mean 100% that it's his? Again, a slippery slope here. And what they're trying to find out in order to charge someone criminally here is who supplied the drugs. And we spoke yesterday about street drugs frequently are put in packaging that identifies the seller. So if they can recover that or see the packaging and get the dealer that sold it to them. But again, look how far removed this is from this case. So we talk about, is it criminal? That remains to be seen.
Right.
Is it civil? Are they going to try to now sue Jordan over this? Is that that's what they're talking. The media certainly is talking about that. Is this criminal or is this civil?
I mean, it's possible that Jordan Willis could be sued for negligence. It's possible, and they could get a judgment against him, but that would be far into the future. And A, nothing's going to bring back your loved ones. B, he depending on how much money he has, whatever, maybe he had some sort of insurance, renter's insurance that might cover something like this. I doubt it. That would be a long term in the future, but you'd have to prove that he had a duty, he breached it, and he caused their deaths. It's possible, but what's the payoff possibly at the end? Is it going to be, he's got $10,000 to his name? Is he wealthy or not? How much money can you get from an insurance company? All those factors will come into play in any sort of, attorney deciding whether or not they're going to sue. One of the families going to sue for negligent homicide, sue for negligence causing a homicide.
Absolutely. Design Rhythm from the chat. Police off the cuff. How many times in your professional career did the excuse I was sleeping for 48 hours pan out to be true? In mine, never. People have used that they were in a stupor, but never for 48 hours. I've never actually seen. Is it possible for someone in a drug stupor to sleep for 48 hours straight? You bet. Sure. You bet it's possible. Have I seen it? No. Vamply Fire. I like that name. It's hard to say, though. The police and legal system have enough to do already. Too much time and resources would be used trying to find a dealer every time this happens. Good point. But there's 3 people dead here. There's 3 bodies, and the families, and it's sort of sad to say that this is in the press, so it's getting extra special attention. But the reality exists. That's true. Yeah. You keep it in the eye of the press. They keep pounding at the police as if the police are doing something wrong. It's going to get attention. It absolutely will get attention, and probably more attention than it would have gotten if there was no attention on it. Mike?
Yeah, Bill, and this is no disrespect to any of the gentlemen who've passed away, Harrington, and that sort of thing. However, if only one gentleman had passed away, nobody would have heard about this whatsoever. It's the oddity of 3 people dying in this sort of environment the way it happened that really picks the press interest. But if you go to any inner city in America, you and I saw this in the 80s and the 90s and early 2000s and everything else. We saw this in New York City. Um, People die all the time from narcotics overdoses. And, depending on what part of town you're in and the circumstances, the press won't even give you, it won't even be a single sentence or one word about your death. And so the fact that it made the news was simply because, unfortunately, sadly, because it's not uncommon, but it is for a death, but it isn't common for three people to die. And that made the news. But that doesn't mean that the death is going to be that you can actually now figure out and solve a narcotic problem in Kansas City and actually find the dealer and bring them to justice. I don't know if that's even going to happen. I would hope so, but I doubt it.
Right. Lisa rode the Walla Bridge. It was not 48 hours. Well, the party was on the 7th. Their bodies were not found until the 9th. So it's sort of close to 48 hours. We might not have the exact time frame there, but again, the party was on the 7th, and their bodies were not found until the 9th. And the bodies were frozen solid. I don't know how long it takes for a body to freeze solid, but I'm sure it takes a while. And one of the ways, of course, it would do that is because when you die, your body temperature drops precipitously, and you could turn. Actually, I've seen bodies frozen solid in my police career. Folks, if you're looking for a great attorney in the New York City metropolitan area, then Joe Murray is your man. Joe's a retired NYPD police officer who studied, got his law degree, and became a great attorney. You can reach Joe on his cell at 718-514-3855. Email him at joe@jmurray-law.com, or go on his website, jmurray-law.com. Not only is Joe a fantastic defense attorney, but also a huge supporter of the Police Off the Cuff podcast. Here's Joe in one of his What Do You Want From Me moments. And he's supported our show for a number of years right now. We really appreciate his input. So, Mike, our whole point today is to sort of calm everybody down a little bit and say, this is more likely the result of three adults. And again, we'll take some heat. People want to hit back at us here. More likely the result of three adults making a very poor decision and dying from a drug overdose that led to them making a poor decision, going outside, passing out, and potentially dying from a cardiac arrest and then freezing to death. So whichever occurred first, second, and third, we'll only know when the results of the autopsy are made public, which they are not right now. The preliminary, we have that word preliminary used both with the autopsy and preliminary used with the toxicology. The finality, the final report of both the autopsy and the toxicology are not available yet. And the district attorney's office and the police department released a preliminary tox and preliminary autopsy to the families so that the families could more or less understand what was going on in this investigation. Mike?
Yeah, we don't know exactly where this will end up, where the trail of information will lead us. But at this point in the investigation, it looks like a voluntary ingestion of narcotics, and they accidentally overdosed by not understanding that there was fentanyl in the cocaine. And it's sad that these three gentlemen have passed away, and it's doubly sad for their families and children. And we mourn their loss for all those who love them. But the narcotics involved, like fentanyl and cocaine and even alcohol, we do know the dangers, and we've kind of become a little bit perhaps numb to the dangers, and we discard the dangers and we proceed anyway. And that's the tragedy of this, is that this was probably, from this point looking forward, a voluntary ingestion of narcotics that resulted in death. And as sad as it is, that's the truth.
Barbara Miller from the chat, really outstanding point. And you're so right. And I could, remove
Yeah.
myself now because it's not my loved one. It's not my relative. And what Barbara Miller says is accepting that a loved one who dies from an OD is responsible ultimately for the consequences of their choice is really hard to do. And you're so right, Barbara. You are so right. And I don't mean to be unfeeling or, but when you look at it from an investigator's perspective, and because people don't want to accept those facts and circumstances, that they want to look at the nefarious side and the potential and, of course, conspiratorial, oh, this was a homicide. And I think when the investigation is completed, unless they can find out who supplied these drugs, that's what the determination will most likely be, is that these were 4 adults, one who didn't die from it, 3 adults that used illicit drugs. They had no idea it was laced with fentanyl. And unfortunately, as a result of a poor decision, let's face it, and it's easy again for me to say, the result of a poor decision, they lost their lives. And that's a horrible thing. And we all, as I said before, we've all had friends, we've all had family members perhaps that lost their lives due to drugs or destroyed their lives due to drugs. So we're not trying to be unfeeling or unsympathetic. We are, but we're also looking at the reality of what occurred here, Mike.
Yeah, Billy, that's the hardest part is to mourn loved ones and just come to a conclusion, but based on the facts, and and try to live with that. That's not easy, and no one is criticizing the gentleman involved whatsoever. They seem to be hardworking men with families and careers and loved ones, and we're not saying that they're criminal, but what they did was something that was reckless, and and as many other people have done, and it's part of our culture right now, and it's sad that they have gotten involved in this, and they pay dearly with their lives, and that's not easy to come for a family to come to terms with that. Not at all. It's very
No
difficult
way.
for people to come to terms with a loved one's death or addiction where it has ruined their lives, because there's always a lot of feelings of recrimination and anger and upsetness.
100%. Carol Vargas from the chat. This is just a very sad story. They just went to have a little fun and went way too far, partying way too long. And how or why they were outside, that's the issue. Maybe alive if inside still. Carol, thank you so much for that comment. And perhaps, we will know, science will give us the answer as to what occurred here. But there's also the other side of this, that, and that's the hard part that you guys are all saying, is that accepting the fact that your loved one made a conscious decision to do drugs and lost their life is hard. It's a hard thing to accept. You're right. Family Fire from the chat, accepting the fact that your loved one is secretly doing drugs is also hard to accept. 100% Family Fire. You are absolutely 100% correct. At some point, the police and the district attorney's office are going to give their final report to the family. And there's going to either be no charges or someone will be arrested for supplying the drugs, which I think will be very difficult to prove. But that's what, in essence, is going to occur. And at that point, when the decision is made as to what occurred here and who is responsible, who is liable, that's when we all must accept the findings of this investigation. And again, imagine across the country that every one of these cases that involved what later was determined to be a drug overdose was investigated to this level. And Mike said earlier, we've seen this type of thing in our police careers all over the place. Helen, the Scottish Llama from the chat, if you take drugs, you have to take the risk that the drugs are being cut with fentanyl or rat poison or talc, baby powder, and other cheap rubbish. Fentanyl is so potent, if you don't know. Yes, you're 100% right, Helen the Scottish Llama. That is a reality that people that buy drugs off the street, are you buying it from a pharmacy? You're buying it from someone licensed? No, you're buying it from a street person who you're just taking faith that they didn't throw anything in there that's going to kill you. And we're seeing more and more of this occur as fentanyl becomes more and more prevalent in our society and put into street drugs by whether it's cartels, whether it's people that run the drug trade. But you can't trust it. Folks, if you're not subscribed, I'm seeing a lot of brand new people in this chat, and I'm really happy that I'm seeing people from all across the country. But if you're not subscribed, please go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, ring that bell, hit the like button, share us with your friends and family. We'd appreciate that because I'm seeing all kinds of new people in the chat from across the country, and that's a great sign that we're drawing people in, that people actually like us. You like some old-time coppers, don't you? So we're thrilled with that. We're thrilled that you're joining us on a Sunday afternoon. Not easy to draw people to any show on a Sunday afternoon, but again, we appreciate it. So, Mike, I guess we could surmise or we could sum up now. And I like to just go back to what our initial dissertation was, of course. It was the fact that, they're called in this thumbnail the Kansas City Three, but we like to use their names. Clayton McGinney, age 36, Ricky Johnson, age 38, David Harrington, age 37. And our whole premise of this show was this criminal, or was this the result of three grown men making a bad decision? And that's what we tried to talk to you about today. And we feel for those three men's families, their friends, their loved ones, and anyone that knew them, that they seem like really great guys, and this, in essence, is a real tragedy and a horrific event. And, how many times can you tell your kids or your loved ones, don't do drugs, you could say it,
Right,
but people still do it. And we wind up with tragedies such as this. Mike, your final words. And I want to also thank you today for coming on with basically zero notice. Again, I always say jokingly that shows you have no life and you're just sitting around reading textbooks and you're ready to go on the show at any minute. And sure enough, you were available. Thank you for coming on today.
no problem.
People really like you in the chat, and some would like you to hear their confession, because I jokingly say it's Father Geary. But thank you so much for coming on today. You add so much to this show, and I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Billy. No problem at all. I enjoy doing it. I'll just go back to grading my students' papers in a little while. No problem. But, sadly, this does appear at this point in the investigation, this does appear to be an unwitting but voluntary ingestion of narcotics without any sort of criminal conspiracy taking place. And we can only hope perhaps someday the person who may have, cut that cocaine could be, arrested and imprisoned. But right now, being a cynic, I don't think so. But, that's where I see it from this point, that they engaged in this behavior. And unfortunately, without being aware of what the circumstances were, they paid with their lives. And that's the big tragedy here, tragedy for them and their entire family.
Absolutely. Going to the chat once more before we sign off. Kathy Sue, could they have snorted coke at the end of the party, unbeknownst to them that it was cut with fentanyl? Kathy, that's what we think happened. Yes,
Yeah.
we think that's because they had cocaine in their system,
Mhm.
as well as THC and fentanyl in a lethal, LETHAL amount. I spelled it out because it's not legal. A lethal amount that ultimately killed them. Natash Ski, to me, Jordan is an experienced recreational drug user. He is also an Ivy League educated chemist and licensed pharmacist. I can't picture not testing his street drugs. Natash, I don't know. I don't know anyone that would do that. there's also allegations that he made the drugs, but there's no proof. So I don't want to repeat what's absolutely just an allegation. So, folks, again, infamous truth teller. Police off the cuff fentanyl is used in anesthesia, but is also regulated by professionals, and people put fentanyl in almost anything on the street in an attempt to get you addicted. Infamous truth teller, I think that's why they call you infamous truth teller. It's a very good point.
Yeah, very good point.
Very good. Excellent point. Wanda Courtney from California, thanks for another amazing, great, informative show, gentlemen. Wanda, thank you for those kind words. We like kind words, We don't always get kind words, but we appreciate them. Hunter X Angler, to be determined, but I'm leaning towards the latter. I think you're determining whether it was a homicide or, a bad decision. That's what we spoke about. Dan Martinek from the chat. Hey, guys, great show today. This is Dano in Orlando. Great presentation, awesome analysis. Looking forward to the next show. Dan, your name looks new to me, so make sure you subscribe. Thank you so much for coming by, and we're glad to see some new names in the chat. It's absolutely a great thing. Jacqueline 11 from the chat. I wonder if they bought a few bags of coke and a bag of fentanyl was actually thrown in there. Well, I think dealers that sell coke on the street add what they consider to be minute amounts of fentanyl, but they're not chemists. So any amount they put in there could result in a fatal overdose by people, and it's just horrific. Vamplifier, much respect to both of you gentlemen. Very balanced and informative discussion. Thank you, Vamplifier. Thank you for coming by. You seem to be a new name in the chat too. Although you were in the last show too. Thank you so much for coming by. Barbara Ann, look at these faces. Nice guys gone too soon. Hugs to families and friends who lost them. You're absolutely 100%. I'll put their faces up on the screen. No one wanted to see these gentlemen lose their lives. Just Richella Pranzo, great show. So much information to sort out with the case. Thanks for the continuing to review and give your insight, Bill and Mike. Richella, you're always one of our bright, shining stars, and we appreciate everything that you and Lieutenant Pete do for us, and so much. And Kim Alliston, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Kim Allison, one of our superstar moderators. Thank you, Kim, for everything you do. She's always plugging the Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories podcast every second of the day. She does all over across the pond in Great Britain. She's up and down the streets telling people about Police Off the Cuff, and we really, 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 really appreciate you so much. So, guys, that's about our show for today. We went over a little further than I thought we would go, but Mike and I get carried away sometimes. Thank you for tuning in. If anything new comes up on this case, we will definitely come back and report it to you. So have a great rest of your Sunday, and God bless.
Good night.
One episode just ain't enough.